Fellow South Africans, Sanbonani, Goeienaand, Dumelang, Limadekwana, Riperili. Tonight I'd like to address you about the energy crisis that is confronting our nation. During the past 3 weeks, severe load shedding has disrupted all of our lives and caused immense damage to our economy. The daily power cuts that we've been experiencing have inconvenienced millions of households, individuals, and have presented huge challenges for businesses in our country. After more than 3 decades without a reliable electricity supply, rather after 1 decade without a reliable supply of energy, South Africans are justifiably frustrated and they are also angry. I understand that. They are also fed up. We have therefore developed a set of actions to respond to this crisis. The crisis that we are facing requires that we should take bold, courageous and decisive action to close the electricity gap in our country. This in many ways is a call for all South Africans to be part of the solution, to contribute in whatever way that we all can to end energy scarcity in South Africa. As government, we are announcing a number of interventions to overcome the immediate crisis. In the past 10 days, I have had extensive discussions with the Eskom executive management, with power station managers and former Eskom personnel. I've also met with labor federations, Business Unity South Africa, the Black Business Council, community representatives, and several experts in the energy sector. This morning I also met with political party leaders. I'm grateful for the valuable proposals and inputs, as well as analyses that they have put forward. These meetings have helped to shape our response and ensure all sections of South African society are involved in finding solutions to this problem, as this is a national crisis. All the people I've spoken to have said this is the time when the country must unite to address this challenge. The set of additional actions I'm announcing this evening, firstly, are aimed at improving the performance of Eskom's existing fleet of power stations. Secondly, these actions will accelerate the procurement of new generation capacity. Thirdly, these actions are intended to increase the private sector investment in generation capacity. Fourthly, these actions are designed to enable businesses as well as households to invest in rooftop solar installation. And finally, these actions are directed at fundamentally transforming the electricity sector and positioning it for future sustainability. So, fellow South Africans, for our response to be effective, we need to understand the problem. In other words, what the problem is. South Africa has installed capacity to produce approximately 46,000 megawatts of electricity, and at peak times when there's high demand, we use about 32,000 megawatts of electricity. However, only 60% of this installed capacity is available at any given time due to some units going through planned maintenance processes and others having unplanned outages. Many of our power stations were built many years ago. The average age of Eskom's power station is around 35 years. Generally, as power stations get older, their performance deteriorates. The construction of our newest power stations, Medupi and Kusile, started late, and they have experienced several delays and also some design flaws. These challenges are being addressed. As a result of this, Eskom deferred essential maintenance to keep the lights on. This is what is causing breakdowns and failures at the moment. The performance of some of Eskom's power stations have been further worsened by extensive theft and fraud as well as sabotage. After years of state capture and mismanagement, there is now a capable and effective management team which is working hard to turn the utility around and reverse years of decay. However, as things stand, we are still faced with an electricity shortage of up to 6,000 megawatts. In recent weeks, a combination of factors resulted in about 18,000 of generation capacity being lost. And this forced Eskom to implement stage 6 load shedding, which distressed all of us. Eskom has to implement load shedding to prevent the electricity grid from collapsing and to ensure that we never experience a complete blackout throughout the country. The factors that led to the latest load shedding included a number of unit breakdowns at some power stations. We also experienced damage to the transmission line from Cahora Bassa in Mozambique, where we procure part of our electricity, and there were also instances reported of deliberate damage to equipment. Teams within Eskom have worked very hard to bring generation units back online and to stabilize the national grid. As a result of their efforts, the system outlook has improved over the past week. The agreement that was reached between Eskom and unions has allowed critical repairs to the units that had broken down to be undertaken and normal electricity generation operations to resume. Progress has also been made by law enforcement agencies in tackling sabotage, theft, and fraud at Eskom power stations and other key installations. While these actions to stabilize electricity generation have brought relief from the current load shedding, the system remains unreliable and vulnerable. The shortage of electricity is a huge constraint on economic growth and job creation. It deters investment and reduces our economy's competitiveness. When investors look at our nation, they think that we do not have the capacity to generate enough power for them to build factories to drive their businesses. As this administration, we have already taken important steps to increase generation capacity and to diversify our energy supply. One of the first steps we took to address electricity shortfall was to revive the Renewable Energy Procurement Program that had stopped. We revived it in 2018. Since then, over 2,000 megawatts of solar and wind power has been connected to the grid through bid window 4 of the program. A further 2,600 megawatts of capacity has been procured through bid window 5, which will begin to add capacity from early 2024. We have started to diversify generation by allowing parties other than Eskom to also generate electricity. In June last year, we raised the licensing threshold for new embedded generation projects from 1 megawatt to 100 megawatts. This removed the licensing requirement for generation projects up to 100 megawatts that are connected to the grid. This measure enabled these generators to have the ability to sell electricity to one another or to other customers, such as factories, mines, or data centers. We also changed the regulations to allow municipalities to procure power independently. A number of our municipalities are already taking advantage of this process. Eskom recently made land available next to its power stations in Mpumalanga for renewable energy projects, which will unlock 1,800 megawatts of new capacity. Eskom has identified additional land that will be released for this purpose. These actions are significant, and they will make a difference over the coming months and years. What the most recent load shedding has made clear is that the actions we have taken and the actions that we continue to take are not enough. We are therefore implementing additional measures to achieve long-term energy security as well as to end load shedding. First, we are fixing Eskom and improving the performance of our existing fleet of power stations. Over time, the maintenance program of Eskom's electricity generation fleet has declined. It is now been decided that over the next 12 months, Eskom will increase the budget allocated for critical maintenance to increase the reliability of its generation capacity. We're cutting red tape that has made it difficult for Eskom to buy maintenance spares and equipment within the required period to effect repairs. This point was raised with me by the power station managers as they detailed to me how difficult it has been for them to repair the units that break from time to time because of the red tape and the delays. One of the challenges that Eskom has faced has been the shortage of skilled personnel and engineers. The utility is now recruiting skilled personnel, including former senior Eskom plant managers and engineers from the private sector. Some of these had left Eskom and had gone to various locales in the world, and Eskom is now seeking to bring them back. But I've also been heartened by approaches that we have received from former plant managers who had left Eskom and have come forward voluntarily to say that they want to lend a hand. Now, these skilled personnel will support various current personnel and help to ensure that world-class operating and maintenance procedures are reinstated. Over the next 3 months, Eskom will take additional actions to add new generation capacity to the grid on an urgent basis. As an immediate measure, surplus capacity will be bought from existing independent power producers. These are power plants which built more capacity than was required and can now supply this excess power to Eskom. As part of addressing the shortage of megawatts, Eskom will now also purchase additional energy from existing private generators such as mines, paper mills, shopping centers, and other private entities that have surplus power. A number of our neighboring countries in Southern Africa, such as Botswana and Zambia, have more electricity capacity than they require for their economies. Eskom will now import power from these countries through the Southern African Power Pool arrangement. Eskom will also use interim power solutions such as mobile generators to supplement current generation capacity for a limited period. Eskom will implement a program that encourages efficient use by consumers to reduce demand at peak times. We have spoken in the past about Eskom's huge debt, which stands at close on to 400 billion rand. The debt continues to be a huge burden on Eskom's ability to address its many challenges. The National Treasury is working to finalize a sustainable solution to Eskom's debt. The Minister of Finance will outline how government will deal with this matter in an effective manner when he presents the medium-term budget policy statement in October. We will use climate funding provided through the Just Energy Transition Partnership that we struck last year to invest in the grid and repurpose power plants that have reached the end of their lives. Eskom will be constructing its first solar and battery storage projects at Komati, Majuba, and Letabo, and several other power stations. This will result in over 500 megawatts being added to the grid. The South African Police Service has set up a special law enforcement team to help Eskom in confronting crime and corruption and fraud that has tended to be quite rife in Eskom power stations. A number of people have already been arrested in recent days, and several others are already being prosecuted for corruption and fraud involving Eskom contracts. With improvements in the regulatory environment and mobilization of society, Eskom will be positioned to carry out its maintenance and investment programs. There can be no longer any excuses that anyone can now offer. These steps will allow us to limit load shedding to lower stages and to reduce the risk of such severe load shedding in the future. To end load shedding, however, we need to urgently add much more capacity to the grid. In other words, we need more megawatts to be put on the grid. And past managers of Eskom tell us that we need the base load of Eskom's capacity to generate electricity to be stabilized by having those units that may not be operating at the present moment to be revived so that that base load can be put on the grid. Our second priority is therefore to accelerate the procurement of new capacity from renewables, capacity from gas, and battery storage. The relevant government departments are working together to ensure that all projects from bid window 5 of the Renewable Energy Program can start construction on schedule. This includes taking a pragmatic approach to the local content requirements for these projects, prioritizing the need to build new capacity as quickly as possible. The Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, together with the Independent Power Producers Office, will provide further details in this regard within the coming days on how we are going to process and deal with the challenges that we face in this regard. The amount of new generation capacity procured through bid window 6 for wind and solar power will be doubled from 2,600 megawatts to 5,200 megawatts. We will release a request for proposals for battery storage by September this year, and a further request for gas power as soon as possible thereafter. The Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy will issue a determination for the remaining allocations in the Integrated Resource Plan 2019 and will open further bid windows on an expedited basis. To ensure effective planning, the country's Integrated Resource Plan is being reviewed to reflect the need for additional generation capacity, as well as to address our climate change commitments. Thirdly, we are accelerating greater private sector investment in generation capacity. Last year, we announced the raising of the licensing threshold to 100 megawatts. This move was widely welcomed. It has unlocked a pipeline of more than 80 confirmed private sector projects with a combined capacity of over 6,000 megawatts. We are already working together with industry to accelerate the most advanced projects, several of which are already entering construction. These changes have fundamentally changed the generation landscape. Following the success of this reform and the enthusiasm shown by the private sector, we will remove the licensing threshold for embedded generation completely. This will enable private investment in electricity generation to rise to higher levels. While they may not require licenses, all new generation projects will still have to register with the regulator and comply with the technical requirements for grid connection and our environmental legislation. One of our greatest challenges is adding capacity to the grid, is the time that it takes for any energy project to receive the necessary approvals and commence construction. The process from design to commercial operation has tended to take more than 3 years, almost 1,000 days, due to lengthy regulatory processes and red tape. While existing legislation may be sufficient in ordinary times, the current crisis requires that we act decisively and more speedily. We will therefore be tabling special legislation in Parliament on an expedited basis to address the legal and regulatory obstacles to new generation capacity for a limited period. We raised this matter this morning with leaders of political parties represented in the National Assembly. There was broad agreement that this process should be hastened once the special legislation has been approved by Cabinet and tabled in Parliament. We will, in the meantime, waive or streamline certain regulatory requirements where it is possible to do so within existing legislation. This includes reducing the regulatory requirements for solar projects in areas of low and medium environmental sensitivity. It also means Eskom can expand power lines and substations without needing to get environmental authorization in areas of low and medium sensitivity and within the strategic electricity corridors. We're also establishing a single point of entry, in other words, a one-stop shop, as it were, for the energy project applications to ensure that there is coordination of approval processes across government, so that those who apply should not be moving from one department to the next, and thus facing months and months of delays. I have instructed departments and entities to review all existing timeframes and to ensure that we process all applications on an urgent basis so that we do not have these elongated delays. These measures are preferable to declaring a state of disaster or even emergency, as some have suggested. These interventions will allow us to do what is necessary to accelerate new generation capacity while protecting the rights of all South Africans and upholding the rule of law. We do not need a state of emergency or declare a national state of disaster to implement common sense regulations that should help in resolving our energy crisis. We have all the instruments and processes that we can implement. Fourthly, we intend to enable businesses as well as households to invest in rooftop solar installation. South Africa has great abundance of sun, which we should really use to generate electricity. There is significant potential for households and businesses to install rooftop solar and connect this power to the grid. To incentivize greater uptake of rooftop solar, Eskom will develop rules and a pricing structure known as a feed-in tariff for all commercial and residential installations on its network. This means that those who can and have already installed solar panels in their homes or businesses will be able to sell surplus power that they do not need to Eskom. And we call on all South Africans to use electricity sparingly as we work towards ending load shedding and getting more energy on the grid. Finally, we are fundamentally transforming the electricity sector and positioning it for future sustainability. We've spoken in the past about restructuring Eskom, which will result in the establishment of 3 entities, namely an electricity generation entity, an electricity transmission entity, and an electricity distribution entity. Eskom has established an independent transmission company and is on track to separate generation distribution businesses by the end of this year. We will soon be appointing boards for the transmission and generation entities. Broader reforms to establish a competitive electricity market will also be expedited through the finalization of the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill to enable private sector investment. These changes will radically transform the structure of the electricity sector for future generations. Many other countries have taken this route and have been able to stabilize their electricity generation. They will diversify our energy sources and improve the security of supply. Now, these changes will allow more generators, both private and state-owned, to compete on an equal footing. The grid will remain owned by the state, in other words, state-owned. Eskom will continue to be the mainstay of our country's energy industry as we improve its efficiency, its financial sustainability, and its performance. We've always said that Eskom is too big to fail, and it is a national asset, and we therefore need to secure it and make it more efficient. But it will coexist with the private investment and generation that is already underway. To ensure that these measures are implemented in a coordinated manner, I have established a National Energy Crisis Committee. The committee is chaired by the Director General in the Presidency and brings together all the departments and entities involved in the provision of electricity. They bring together the Department of Public Enterprises, Department of Fisheries, Forestry and Energy, the Department of Mineral and Energy, the Treasury is also part of it, the police are also part of it, and so all the departments that have to do with helping us to stabilize our energy system will be part of it, and it will be coordinated from the Presidency. The National Energy Crisis Committee will draw on the best available expertise from business, from labor, from professional engineering entities, and community-based organizations. We'll be able to work together with all these entities as we did when we confronted the issue of the pandemic, but more particularly the vaccination process, where we had business, labor, community-based organizations working together with government to address the biggest rollout of vaccinations our country had ever been through. So we will harness all this energy and all these various entities as we work to ensure that we stabilize our energy generation. The relevant ministers will report to me directly from their various ministries on a regular basis to ensure that we move quickly to implement the actions that we have announced today. So, fellow South Africans, the measures I have outlined are not just to address our immediate constraints. They are also to ensure that we do stabilize our energy generation in our country through a variety of all these measures. Our ultimate objective is to achieve long-term energy security so that we never have to experience electricity shortage again. We aim to do this by stabilizing Eskom and improving plant performance, establishing a competitive electricity market, opening the way for private investment in new generation capacity, and increasing our investment in renewables. As we do this, we will also heed the message from community-based organizations who said our focus must also be on the poor and the vulnerable. Now, these measures are necessary to ensure that we revive economic growth so that we are able to create jobs in our country. In the process, we will position our country as a leading player in the transition to new and sustainable energy sources, turning this crisis into an opportunity for future growth and resilience. Just as government will play its part, I call on business, labor, and all of society to join us in this effort. This includes urgent implementation of the Eskom Social Compact and the reinforcing of the commitments and the concrete steps to be taken by all social partners. Just as we rallied behind the national effort to contain COVID-19, so too must we now contribute whatever we can as South Africans. As households, we can use electricity sparingly. And we can also address the issue of illegal connections, because illegal connections continue to be a major challenge that our country faces. We must join in the massive rollout of rooftop solar and contribute to the solution as well. Business needs to reduce its consumption through greater energy efficiency. Business should seize the opportunities that have been created and invest in generation projects as well. Labour should engage in a spirit of partnership, mindful that achieving energy security is the most important thing we can do to protect existing jobs and also to create new ones. Last weekend, I had the occasion to visit Tutuka Power Station in Mpumalanga. This power station's performance has been badly affected by criminal activities. We heard of maintenance spares being stolen, and these spares being sold back to the power station in Tutuka and other power stations. We were told of ongoing theft of oil on a massive scale, and the deliberate damaging of equipment so that Eskom should continue to hire equipment from private contractors. What is happening at Tutuka and other power stations is deliberate sabotage by well-organized criminal syndicates that are destroying the utility and damaging our economy. After my visit to Tutuka, I met with all Eskom power station managers. I was impressed with the diversity of this group of men and women and their commitment to getting it right in terms of running the power stations, but I was also impressed with the skills that they have. And I was also impressed with their total commitment to making sure that our power stations function well and they adhere to a maintenance philosophy. We owe the teams at these power stations a debt of gratitude for their actions, for their work day in and day out, the various managers and the workers, to ensure that the lights are kept on, and when we have load shedding moments, they are the first to be usually troubled. They do set a good example for all of us in terms of their commitment, and I told them that they have my full support, and I told them that also that we would like them to rid our utility of the rife corruption that we have been told about. The measures that we are announcing this evening, together with the steps we have already taken, will hasten the end of load shedding. They will put our country on a clear path towards reliable as well as affordable and sustainable energy supply. I'm convinced that if we work together and if we hold each other to account, if we meet our time frames and our deadlines and fulfill our commitments, we will be able to end this energy crisis that we are going through and create the conditions for growth of our economy and for job creation. More than that, we will show that we are up to the challenge of rebuilding our beloved country. I'd like to thank you as we embark on this journey of putting right our energy generation, working together. Thank you.